Two dates, 88 years apart, and between them, someone rewrote the will of God. Date number 1, February 27, 1833, Kirtland, Ohio. Joseph Smith receives a revelation about food and drink. The text of that revelation says, in its own opening lines, that it is given not by commandment or constraint, not a rule, not a requirement, not a test of worthiness. Date number 2, the year 1921, Salt Lake City, President Heber J. Grant declares that obedience to that same revelation is now required to enter the temple. No new revelation is published. No new section is added to the Doctrine and Covenants. No vote is taken by the membership. A piece of advice from 1833 becomes the wall that decides, from that point forward, who walks into a sealing room and who waits outside. What happened between those two dates is one of the strangest doctrinal evolutions in American religious history, and almost no member is ever told the full story. There is something else almost no member is told: what Joseph Smith was drinking inside Carthage jail in the final hours of his life. The history of the church records it in plain language. It contradicts everything the modern word of wisdom claims to be, and we will get to it before this video ends. Part 1. The revelation that was not a commandment, February 27, 1833. A room above Newell K. Whitney's store in Kirtland, Ohio. The men of what was called the School of the Prophets met there to study doctrine. Joseph Smith was their leader, and like most American men of that era, many of them chewed tobacco. They smoked pipes. They spit on the floor. The room reeked. Emma Smith had to clean that floor. According to Brigham Young, who later told the story himself, Emma complained to her husband about the smell and the mess. Her complaint sent Joseph to his knees in prayer. The answer he received became Section 89 of the Doctrine and Covenants. Latter-day Saints would later call it the Word of Wisdom. Now read what the text actually says. In its opening verses, the revelation declares itself to be given not by commandment or constraint, but as a principle with promise, adapted to the capacity of the weak and the weakest of all saints. In plain modern English, it is advice, counsel, friendly guidance, not a law, not a requirement. The original revelation discouraged strong drinks, tobacco, and what it called hot drinks. It encouraged grains, vegetables, and the sparing use of meat. There were no penalties for ignoring it, no interview questions, no locked temple doors, no missions denied, no families divided at sealing rooms, and the early saints lived accordingly. For the rest of the 1830s, the 1840s, the 1850s, and most of the rest of the 19th century, Latter-day Saints drank coffee. They drank tea. They drank beer. They drank wine. The church itself used wine in its sacrament services for decades after the Revelation. Apostles drank Danish beer openly. Apostle Charles W. Penrose, later a member of the First Presidency, was known to serve wine. Apostle George Albert Smith, who would become president of the church, took brandy for medicinal reasons throughout his life. Emmeline B. Wells, who would lead the Relief Society, drank an occasional cup of coffee. None of this disqualified any of them from anything. So how did the world's most enforced religious lifestyle rule grow out of a revelation that explicitly said it was not a rule? Hold that question. Because the prophet who received that revelation in 1833 did not live by the version of it that exists today. And the proof is recorded in the church's own official documentary history. Part 2. The Wine Inside. Carthage Jail, June 27, 1844. Carthage Jail, Illinois. Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram had been arrested on charges of treason after the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor printing press. They were being held upstairs in the jailer's bedroom along with Apostle John Taylor and Apostle Willard Richards. A mob was forming outside. The men in that room knew what was coming. The History of the Church, the official 7-volume documentary history published by the church itself under the direction of B. H. Roberts, records what happened next. The exact phrase appears in Volume 6, page 616. Sometime after dinner, the men sent for some wine. The wine was delivered. The men drank it. John Taylor sang the hymn, "A Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief." And within hours, Joseph and Hiram Smith were dead. The defenders of the modern word of wisdom have an explanation ready for this moment. They will tell you the wine was medicinal, that it was meant to revive the spirits of men facing execution, that it does not count against the rule. For many faithful members, this is read as an act of mercy. a small comfort granted to men hours away from a violent death. That reading is sincere, and it deserves to be acknowledged. But for the historian, the fact remains in plain view. The act itself was not treated as a transgression by anyone in that room, not by Joseph Smith, not by Hiram Smith, not by John Taylor, who would later become president of the church, not by Willard Richards. None of them framed the wine as a violation of the 1833 revelation, because in 1833, the revelation itself said it was not a commandment. And notice what the medicinal explanation actually concedes. It concedes that Joseph Smith drank wine 11 years after receiving the revelation about wine. It concedes that the prophet himself operated under the older, looser original meaning of the text, the meaning the text itself describes, counsel, not commandment. And the Carthage wine was not an isolated event. Throughout his life after 1833, Joseph Smith continued to drink wine at social gatherings. The history of the church records multiple instances. His mother, Lucy Mack Smith, documented her family's involvement in alcohol production going back generations. Brigham Young, his successor, used tobacco openly and acknowledged it from the pulpit. Brigham Young had direct commercial interests in tea and tobacco production in early Utah territory. His personal example did not match the strict modern interpretation that would later be built in his name. This is not anti-Mormon argument. This is the church's own published historical record. The revelation of 1833 was lived in 1833 the way it was written in 1833, as a principle with promise, not as a binding law of worthiness. So when did counsel become commandment? When did advice become a barrier to your own daughter's wedding? That answer takes us out of the realm of revelation entirely and into the realm of administrative policy. How a suggestion became a wall. The shift happened in stages. Each stage made the rule a little tighter. None of those stages came from a new revelation. Stage 1. The year 1851. Brigham Young, now leading the church from Utah, proposed at General Conference that the saints formally commit to live the word of wisdom. A vote was taken. The motion passed, but enforcement remained inconsistent. Brigham himself continued to use tobacco. Many apostles continued to drink. There was no temple barrier. A faithful, tithe-paying Latter-day Saint could drink a cup of coffee every morning and stand in full fellowship. Stage 2. The year 1902. President Joseph F. Smith began instructing stake presidents to refuse temple recommends to flagrant violators. The historian Thomas G. Alexander documented this transition in detail in the journal Dialogue. Joseph F. Smith told local leaders to be lenient with older members who had used tobacco and tea their entire lives, but firm with habitual drunkards. Stage 3. The year 1906. The First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 quietly replaced wine with water in their own temple sacrament services. The wider church followed over the next several years. The change to water-only sacrament was not announced as a doctrinal shift. It was administrative. Stage 4. The year 1921. President Heber J. Grant, 3 years into his administration, declared that adherence to the word of wisdom was now required to obtain a temple recommend. No new revelation accompanied the change. No new section was added to Scripture. Historian Thomas G. Alexander, in his book Mormonism in Transition, documents that there is no evidence of a specific revelation backing the 1921 enforcement. Only references to earlier statements by Brigham Young. Only administrative instruction. A revelation that was never given as a commandment had been retroactively reclassified as the single most enforced lifestyle rule in the entire church. Stage 5. The year 1933. The temple recommend requirement was formally added to the General Handbook of Instructions. The same year, exactly 100 years after the 1833 revelation, American prohibition ended. The historical timing is striking. The federal government walked away from forbidding alcohol in the very year the church locked the rule into its handbook. This is the part most members are never taught in seminary or institute. The word of wisdom that exists today, the temple blocking, mission blocking, family dividing version of the rule, is a 20th century construction. It was built piece by administrators in Salt Lake City. And it was then taught to every subsequent generation as if it had always been that way. It was never that way. The caffeine evolution, from pulpit prohibition to campus product. If the rule were truly about health, you would expect it to be consistent across the decades. It is not. For generations, Latter-day Saints were taught that the word of wisdom was about caffeine. That logic was taught in classrooms, repeated in sacrament talks, printed in church magazines. Apostle John A. Whitso, in his foundational 1937 book on the Word of Wisdom, warned specifically against cola drinks because of the caffeine. Apostle Bruce R. McConkie wrote that partaking of cola drinks violated the spirit of the Word of Wisdom. President Gordon B. Hinckley, asked by Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes, told a national television audience that Latter-day Saints avoid caffeine. For decades, the caffeine explanation was the explanation. Brigham Young University did not sell caffeinated sodas on its campus. Faithful families poured out bottles of Coca-Cola at home. Children were taught that a cup of coffee and a can of Coke were the same kind of sin. Then came 2012. In August of that year, NBC aired an hour-long special on Mormonism on the program Rock Center with Brian Williams. The program repeated the common understanding that Latter-day Saints avoid caffeine. The church's newsroom responded with an official correction. The Doctrine and Covenants, the statement said, does not mention caffeine. The Word of Wisdom prohibition applies specifically to tea and coffee. Cola drinks were not forbidden. In a single press release, the church contradicted decades of pulpit teaching by senior apostles. The newsroom statement was later quietly edited to soften the wording, but the substance held. Brigham Young University began selling caffeinated sodas on campus shortly afterward. If caffeine was never the rule, then what was the rule? The text of Section 89 does not name coffee. It does not name tea. It uses the phrase hot drinks. That phrase was interpreted in the 19th century to mean coffee and tea. But iced coffee is also forbidden today. Iced tea is also forbidden today, which means the temperature-based reading of the original text collapses on itself. In 2019, church magazines issued further clarifications. Green tea is forbidden. Iced coffee is forbidden. Vaping is forbidden. Marijuana, even where legal under civil law, is forbidden. Coffee-flavored ice cream is discouraged, but technically allowed. Each clarification was presented as if it had always been the rule. But the historical record shows the opposite. The rule is, whatever the current leadership says, the rule is, at the moment they say it. That is not a fixed divine command. That is an administrative policy that adjusts itself as needed. And it is the policy that decides today whether a worthy Latter-day Saint walks into a temple, serves a mission, or attends a child's sealing. Think about what the modern Word of Wisdom actually does in real lives. A faithful member who drinks an energy drink keeps full standing. A faithful member who drinks a single cup of coffee loses access to the temple. A faithful member who eats steak every day of his life walks freely into a sealing. A faithful member who drinks 1 cup of green tea is told she cannot attend her granddaughter's wedding. None of this is in the original text. The original text said it was not a commandment. The original text said meat should be eaten sparingly. The original text was given because the floor of a schoolroom in Ohio in 1833 was covered in tobacco spit. What the rule became, a binary worthiness test, a gatekeeping mechanism at every temple door across the world, a reason families are separated at the most sacred moments of their lives, is the work of 20th century administrators, not 19th century revelation. Whether you are a member trying to live your faith with full integrity, or someone who has already chosen a different path, the documented history from 1833 to 1921 belongs to all of us. It is part of a shared record. It is not the property of one side of the conversation. And honest engagement with that record, wherever it leads you personally, is something the original revelation itself seemed to invite when it described itself as adapted to the capacity of the weak and the weakest of all saints. And if you walked away from the church because you finally saw the gap between what was actually revealed in 1833 and what is enforced in 2026, you did not lose your faith. You found the historical record. The same record the church itself published in the history of the church. The same record that shows Joseph Smith sending for wine inside Carthage jail, hours before his death, 11 years after the revelation about wine. The prophet who received the word of wisdom did not live by the modern word of wisdom. He could not have. The modern word of wisdom did not yet exist. If this is the first time you have heard the full historical timeline of Section 89, you are not alone. Most members are taught only the polished version. Almost no one is taught what happened between 1833 and 1921. Almost no one is taught about the wine in Carthage jail. Almost no one is told that the rule they grew up with was built by committee, decades after the revelation it claims to enforce. Subscribe to the channel. We are working through the doctrines, the policies, and the institutional turning points that shape the modern Latter-day Saint Church. One document at a time. One revelation at a time. One uncomfortable truth at a time. Leave the next topic you want investigated in the comments. We read every single one, and we are already researching the next story.